Now let's look at what we're going to do next, and that is to create those lines. Now I've hidden the polyline here in this diagram. This is actually, the interface looks different. This is the older version of Dynamo, and this is kind of why I'm redoing these videos. Now I've hidden the polygon of these 3 points, and what we're going to do is they're actually going to create 3 lines. 2 of those are lines, and 1 is a NURBS curve by points, so that we can generate that kind of curvature to it. And so we've already made NURBS curves by points, and so we should be pretty familiar with everything here. The only nuances are we have the idea of the structure length, how deep we want to go, and then when we try to find this midpoint, we use a code block to divide that in half to find a center point. And so it's basically straightforward. So once again, you could just look at this and just kind of duplicate this so that you could, making sure that you actually understand the concepts that are going here. And one of the ways to do that is just to flex some of these elements. So let's go ahead and start building these. So I'm going to move this off the screen here, if I can grab it. Excuse me just a minute while I organize this a little better. Okay, so the first thing is this idea of coming up with a line by a start point and end point. So I'm going to Google or search line by start point and end point. And this needs a direction also. Start point and direction and length, what it'll be. Excuse me for saying start point and end point. So what I'll do is I'll pull off this polygon thing to get it a little bit out of the way. We have this first point that we're going to use, so that'll be the start point. And I'll just try to zoom in here so that the text is a little bit clearer. And what we need is a direction, so we need a vector. So I'm going to type vector. And we should be able to find I believe it is a y vector here. So let's see if we can find that y vector. That's actually the wrong way I want that to come out. So let me delete that. Vector y-axis. So it's just a straight vector. We'll put that in for direction. And we don't have any length yet, so let's make a new slider. So I'll just duplicate this one. And we'll call this the structure length, the length going, like the depth. So let's go ahead and let me double click on this. I think depth's a better description. Structure depth. And let's just kind of review. It goes to a maximum of 30. Maybe we can make that 50 feet. We can always change that. Let's just close this off now. Now that we have that idea of a structure depth, that will be our length. And I'll add that in. And now we should be able to see that line back here. And as I move this, you can see that line getting shorter and longer. All right, so now we need to do the exact same thing for the next line up. So we can actually just use the idea of just copying this, pasting it down. And now we're going to use that second point as the start point. And now we have our second line. And now we've got to go ahead and build that NURBS curve. And we actually have the start of that with this geometry translate. The one thing we didn't put in here is we've done the start width of this point, but we're doing nothing to move it in the z direction as far as height. So let's go ahead and make a start height. So I'm going to just duplicate this. Hold on a second. And I'll just double click on this so we can change its name. And instead of width, we're going to go height. And we want to plug that into the z direction because we're moving vertically. And if we move all of our definition over, now you can see how we can adjust the height. And I've left that polygon active so you can see what's going on there. So this is the first point of what are going to be 3 points moving back to create a NURBS curve. So we can go ahead and actually just duplicate these items here. So I'm going to select all 3 of these and go copy and paste. And then I'm just going to rename some of these and change their geometry a bit. So this is going to be the second midpoint. And we know that the midpoint is going to be halfway of the length of that line, which is going to be half of our depth. So I'm going to make a code block right away. Code block is a place for us to enter formulas. So I'm just going to write x divided by 2 because I'm going to find the midpoint. I just want to find that halfway point. And that gives us a really nice way to input this little bit of math, so to speak. So I'm going to drag a connection to this. And then I'm going to put that into, going to move down here. I want to make that now the Y translation, is it? Yep, there we go. So now that's, if you look here, we move probably what is about halfway back there. So now we have that midpoint. These are now labeled wrong because we now have a new point. So this will be, so I'll just double click on this and I'll call it mid width. And I'll call it mid height. And we'll copy them down one more time to get that end condition. And this is, all intended to give us that real fine control over the way our geometry of our object is going to look. So now we'll just call this the end. And the end is actually that last point, so it's the length. So now we're going to just skip the code block this time. We don't want to get the mid any longer. And I just accidentally connected that to something I don't know about. Let me see if I can, and I want to make this into the Y direction to get that end point. So now we have our 3 points, and this is now the end width. And the end height. And the last thing we need to do to complete this part of the exercise is to generate that idea of what a NURBS curve. So we have to figure out what our definition will be. So it's going to be NURBS curve by points. So we could look under geometry. Let's see if I can find that way. Let's go up here and go to geometry, go to curves, and oh, here it is, NURBS curve all by itself. Oops. NURBS curve by points. So we have, not by control points, by just points. All right, now obviously we have a problem here. We can't put 3 points into a single node. So once again, we need that idea of a list create. So I'm just going to right click and call up a list create. And we're going to have 3 points again to make that NURBS curve. So we have the first point, that midpoint geometry, and that endpoint geometry. And while we have that list, we can actually just look at what that list says. So if I go here, those are those 3 points added together. I'm going to pull those in, and now we have that NURBS curve. And because I haven't changed any of these numbers, we don't have anything exciting happening here. But if I want to dip that down, if I want to pull it in, now I have complete control. If I want that end width to be narrower than the start, and maybe even higher than the start, now I have total flexibility over the kind of geometry that I create with that. And the trick is now to get all of our ribs to align with the curves that we've created.